Now, I want to start from the beginning. You worked at the University of Chicago when? You taught there?
I was there from 94 to 99.
And did that overlap completely when Obama was there, or part of the time?
Just part of the time. I'd been there for a little while before he got there. I'd been there for a couple of years before he got there.
Now, was he a full-fledged professor, or was he an adjunct professor?
He was a part-time lecturer.
So this well, all right, but this idea that he was his constitutional professor, he wasn't a constitutional professor, was he? He was a lecturer.
Right. I mean, academics guard their titles very tightly, and there's a huge difference between somebody who's gone through the tenure process, who's been considered to have published substantial research, which you'd have to do at a school like the University of Chicago, and somebody who's a lecturer. They'll often, many law schools will, probably almost all, get some people who maybe practicing lawyers to come in to teach a class.
Right, but they're not full professors. I mean, I've had some of these nitwits from the ACLU when I was in law school come in and teach and then go back to destroying America.
Right. No, there's a big difference between a professor and somebody who's a lecturer.
So he wasn't a professor. He wasn't tenured. Let's get that straight, first of all, correct?
Right.
Now, how did you come across each other?
Well, as I said, I've been there for a little while. When kind of my habit, I just go and introduce myself to new people when they would come. And I went up, introduced myself to him, and he said, "Oh, you're the gun guy." And I said, "Yeah, I guess so." And he turned to me and he said, "I don't believe people should be able to own guns." And I said,
Whoa, now stop right there.
Right.
He said what?
He said, "I don't believe people should be able to own guns."
And this is just 15 years ago.
Right.
And then you said what?
I said, well, I knew or at least I'd heard that he'd been helping out with the city of Chicago suit against the gun makers a little bit. And I said, well, maybe we could have lunch sometime and talk about this. And he just kind of grimaced at me and turned around and walked away. That was the end of the conversation. I probably ran into him, maybe 12 2 dozen times while I was there at the law school, but all our conversations were very short.
Well, now, did you ever have lunch or dinner with him in a group or one-on-one?
No. Most academics, I'm a pretty conservative guy, and I'd say I was well to the right of virtually all the faculty there, and most of the schools I've been at. But even though you disagree with lots of people, they have a desire, most of them, the vast majority, have a desire to still talk and argue. It's part of the academic experience that at least you enjoy the process of discussing issues. Barack wasn't that way at all.
Now, wait a minute. You called him Barack. Were you friendly with each other?
Well, academics, pretty much everybody called each other on a first-name basis.
I used to call him, look at that egghead over there. But you guys used first-name bases.
Right. You don't go and call somebody professor or something, or...
No, but now in this conversation, you're calling him Barack. So you knew him well enough to call him Barack.
Right, and he would know me well enough to call me John, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell me, what other conversations? First of all, what was it like? He said, well, I don't believe people should own guns, but he didn't stand there and engage. He just moved along. Is that kind of how it was, hit and run?
That's exactly what it was. Most of the people there would argue with you, and you'd get into a discussion, and I enjoyed that. I thought that was fun. There's lots of people that you would know, and I'm sure you would disagree with a lot. I considered friends because even if I disagreed with them, it was still fun to talk to them, like Cass Sunstein, somebody that you've talked about on your program before. He's a fairly famous law professor, was at Chicago, went to Harvard. We had him over for dinner at least 15 times, maybe 18 times while we were there. Cass, when he'd come over, we'd just argue. It's not like I expected to really change his mind on lots of things, and he probably didn't think he was going to change my mind on too many things. But we enjoyed the process of talking about it. And Obama, my impression was he just liked to talk to people he agreed with. He didn't enjoy the normal give and take that you see in academia, where people go and try to figure out some bottom line to bigger ideas.
So when you hear him say, look, I'm open to these Republican ideas, and it's obvious he's not. But
Right.
So when you hear him say that, you're saying, well, there goes Barack again. He's never been open to other ideas.
Right. I during the campaign, he wasn't the guy that I remembered. Now, people can change after 10 years or so, but he was never somebody that I viewed as being open to other ideas. He had a very strong political view. He's a very ideological guy. I thought he was well to the left of a lot of the faculty, which is quite an
So
accomplishment.
he was to the left of a left-wing faculty.
Right. Well, I mean, most law school faculties in the country are fairly left-wing.
No, but you're saying he was to the left of a left-wing faculty.
Right.
Interesting. Go ahead. I interrupted you.
Right.
Well, let me ask you this. So when you saw him campaigning, you said this didn't seem like the guy I knew. Why is that?
Well, because the guy I knew never gave the appearance of actually enjoying or be interested in talking to people he disagreed with. And one of the things I heard many times during the campaign was about how he'd bring people together, and about how he liked having people around who disagreed with them. That was, I never got the impression that he liked having people around. I mean, I ran into him there are a number of times where, even when I was just trying to be nice to help him out in some way, he just wouldn't have anything to do with talking to me, and I felt it was because of the fact that we just disagreed so much on the gun issue.
Well, now let me focus. So you would reach out to him, and he would basically push you away.
Right.
And
so,
you think that was an ideological reaction?
Yeah, I definitely got that impression that it was.
Would you call him an ideological bomb thrower? I don't mean physically. I mean just ideologically, way out there, willing to do what you need to do to advance the cause.
He always impressed me as somebody who was very ideologically driven, that he was a hard left type guy.
So he said people shouldn't own guns. Did he say anything else like that would be interesting to us? Any other... that stands out in my mind just because, even at Chicago, I rarely ran into people who would make that bold of a statement to me about the gun issue. They would say they have problems or something, but it wouldn't be just flat out, I just don't think people should be able to have guns. And so I'm sure that's one reason why that stood out in my mind. But I'd say generally just his unwillingness to communicate or talk about things was the other main thing that just stood out. And the fact that I had the strong impression that he just really disliked me because of my stand on guns. Now let me ask you this. How did other faculty view him, do you know?
Well, when he was brought in to be a lecturer, my understanding was very clear from the beginning that he was going to run for public office. There was some important people on the faculty who didn't view him as a particularly strong candidate to ever have a position on the faculty. They didn't think he was the type of guy who would be able to do serious work or have...
He wasn't an academician, was he? Let's be blunt.
Right. But they
and yet in the media, this is how they portray him.
Right. But they were assured that they didn't have to worry about him ever getting a job on the faculty, that he was going to run for politics. In fact, they knew he was going to run for political office before he even showed up at the University of Chicago. That was part of the understanding, that it would be relatively easy for him to run for public office if he had an academic position. It'd be nice to have the affiliation with the university, but also if you're only a part-time lecturer and you're only having to teach a few hours a week and you're not doing research, that gives you lots of time to go and campaign. I mean, essentially you're getting a salary. Normally, academics spend a lot of their time doing research. You don't spend a lot of time teaching, don't spend a lot of time in the class.
All right, I want you to hold your thought because I want you to stay with me. This is fascinating to me. I want to continue. So remember what you're talking about. That is a part-time lecturer who was always going to run for office, and everybody knew it. We'll come right back. That's Dr. John Lott, a very solid man, good friend of the show, a good friend of mine. We'll be right back with John.